Tom, I've certainly been involved with the Bible my whole life, brought up in Judaism, studied the New Testament, and really kind of a passion to understand the reality. Trained in science, and for many years now have really looked to philosophy to understand stuff. And I've looked at the philosophy of science, philosophy of religion, philosophy of mind, other areas. And I've just been thinking, is it possible to apply that way of thinking, a philosophy of a field where you're looking to get fundamental principles, and apply that to the Bible?
It depends what you mean by fundamental principles, of course. And I do think that when we're reading the Bible, certainly I as a Christian think that we are in touch with fundamental realities. The problem is it isn't a principle or a set of principles. It's a story, and it's an open-ended story. And whereas a musical symphony has 4 movements usually, I think the Bible has 5. It's more like a Shakespeare play. And I think the Bible works as a narrative in 5 acts, of which most of the 5th one is missing. And this is the fun thing about it, that you've got creation, you've got fall, you've got Israel, you've got Jesus, and then you've got the beginning of a 5th act with the resurrection and ascension and the Spirit, and then you've got the end of the 5th act sketched in loosely, the new heavens and new earth. And then we are like actors who are told, okay, learn how the play works, and now improvise through so that you get to that goal rather than some other. So obviously this is a Christian read of the Bible. Jewish readings would be different, though I think Jewish readings of the Bible, not always in the rabbis, but in some Second Temple tellings, they do see their Hebrew scriptures as a story in search of an ending. The Christians are saying this is the sort of ending, but it's an advance ending, the Jesus bit, because the real ending, ultimate ending, is coming later. And we live within that ongoing narrative. So it's not a matter of, here are these principles, now we apply them. It's, here's this story, what does it mean to live in that story?
So that means to me that if I'm trying to develop a philosophy of the Bible, it's a category that you have defined as a story, a flow, as opposed to a way of imparting very specific principles, which might be like a systematic theology. So to me, that's a category of approach to the Bible. Is the story approach right, or is there another approach? That's one way of thinking. Are there other parallel ways to look at the Bible on any level whatsoever? I mean, it's a collection of books and documents that came from all different kinds of sources. So there's a source kind of way of thinking. You gave the overarching story way. There's a source. I mean, I'm trying to get different categories.
Yes, I mean, just as you can look at Shakespeare's plays and see, well, actually, this was a legend which was around at the time, or he got this from the Roman dramatists or whatever. So we can look at sources, and we can look at early, possibly earlier texts, like some people think there was a version of Luke before the Luke we've got now, and all that sort of thing. And that may be helpful because it may help you with the details. So if you were producing a Shakespeare play, you'd want the action to feel as a whole action, but you'd want to say to the actors, now listen, in this scene you have to remember that this has just happened and that Shakespeare was aware of that going on in his society, or Elizabeth was about to die, or whatever it was. So we can build in all those other things, but it seems to me that the presentation of the Bible as a narrative, a big, sprawling, many-sided narrative, which has got room for all sorts of stuff like Proverbs, you know, because part of the narrative of Scripture is what does it mean to be human? And Proverbs says, I'll tell you what it means to be human, and here's 99 different precepts to tell you, because that's what it means to have the fear of the Lord, which is the beginning of wisdom. So there's all sorts of strands which come in. Another way of saying this would be to talk about a river which has had many, many streams contributing to it, but which then invites us to dive in and swim, or perhaps be carried along by the current. And for me, as an Anglican priest, the idea of liturgy is precisely to step into the current of Scripture and let it carry you somewhere which you maybe hadn't expected to go.
Another category I would classify as the question of inerrancy or errancy. If you have the stories and the liturgy, are some of those stories true, and some of them, you know, little here and there not true, and I have to discern the difference.
It all depends what you mean by true. Here we go again. And, you know, it's an interesting concept because there's at least three philosophical ways of dealing with truth, and I think the Bible contributes to that. The question of errancy and inerrancy comes to us from American rationalism from the late 18th century onwards, and it's a way of not treating the Bible as a story. It's a way of treating it as a pseudo textbook. It's a way of escaping from the right brain reading of the Bible, if you like, into a would-be left brain reading for use in apologetic purposes. And fortunately, we in Britain are not usually skewered on this question, so I tend to resist it. And I would say,
I could argue, though, that treating the Bible as a story is a nice way to excuse the errancy and building a moat around it so you can't attack the Bible on mistakes.
I can see that you might take it that way, but it's a way of saying that the larger category of God making the world, God calling Abraham and the people of Israel, the story of Israel, you know, it doesn't much matter to me if in one place it says that this battle happened, and then we find a text in the ancient Near East which says, no, it was different. It seems to me that the truth question gets focused particularly on the events of the gospel. Obviously, if there was never an Abraham, never a Moses, never a David, then I think, you know, I really don't know what the story is about, because God is the creator, and we are living in a world of actual events, of heaven and earth events, of a temple where heaven and earth meet. And if somebody says, no, it doesn't matter whether it happened because it's all about ideas in people's heads, then no, this is not the biblical narrative at all.
So the historicity of the Bible is a very critical thing. I mean, there are biblical minimalists who are good archaeologists, and there's great debate in the field that, you know, some people say that Solomon never exists, a few say still that David never exists, or their kingdom was very small, it was just a tribe, it wasn't a big, you know, but big empire, which the Bible seems to indicate. Are those troublesome?
They could be troublesome if it eventually turned out that absolutely none of those things had happened or anything like it. For me, the focus is always on Jesus. Who was Jesus? What do we know about him? And it's almost as though there's a crescendo of historical importance which comes to that point. And as I said before, if Jesus never existed, or if he never did any of the things that it says, then if that could be demonstrated, then I would say that really does matter. I would have, with great sorrow, to give up my faith, to give up my priesthood, and I would go and do something quite different. I'd probably be a music critic for choice. But so I think historicity really does matter, but we can get fixated on it and forget that most of the Bible is poetry, and that doesn't mean that it doesn't matter whether the Exodus happened. It just means we have to approach it on many, many levels, and the fussiness about errancy and inerrancy goes with, as I think I said, that left brain approach which is characteristic of post-Enlightenment modern Western culture, and which actually has had incredibly damaging effects in many other fields. And the Bible is a much bigger and more important and more interesting and exciting book than that.